Hello, everyone, and good morning. Thanks for joining us today for a sutta study with Ayya Soma. So this morning we'll be looking at Samyutta Nikaya 5.5 with Uppalavaṇṇā, and you can find a link to the sutta in the live chat if you'd like to follow along. And if you have questions at any time, feel free to type them in, and I will address them at the end of the talk. So good morning so far to Gita, Peter A, as well as Jens, who's watching. And hello to other friends who are watching behind the scenes, so to speak. So at this time, I'll pass things over to Ayya Soma for this morning's sutta study.
All right, thank you, Bhante Sumano, and good morning to everyone. Thanks for joining in. And we can start by paying homage to the Buddha, and then we can, as I like to do, read the sutta all in one breath, and then I'll go back to it with more calm afterwards. All right. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham dhammam sangham namassami. At Savatthi. Then in the morning, the Bhikkhuni Uppalavaṇṇā, dressed and taking bowl and robe, entered Savatthi for alms. When she had walked for alms in Savatthi and had returned from her alms round, after her meal she stood at the foot of a sal tree in full flower. Then Māra, the evil one, desiring to arouse fear, trepidation, and terror in the Bhikkhuni Uppalavaṇṇā, desiring to make her fall away from concentration, approached her and addressed her in verse. Having gone to a sal tree with flowering top, you stand at its foot all alone, Bhikkhuni. There is none whose beauty rivals yours. Foolish girl, aren't you afraid of rogues? Then it occurred to the Bhikkhuni Uppalavaṇṇā, now who is this? A human being or a non-human being? This is Māra, the evil one, desiring to make me fall away from concentration. Then the Bhikkhuni Uppalavaṇṇā, having understood this is Māra, the evil one, replied to him in verses. Though 100,000 rogues just like you might come here, I stir not a hair, I feel no terror. Even alone, Māra, I don't fear you. I can make myself disappear, or I can enter inside your belly. I can stand between your eyebrows, yet you won't catch a glimpse of me. I am the master of my mind, the basis of power well developed. I'm free from all bondage. Therefore, I don't fear you, friend. Then Māra, the evil one, realizing the Bhikkhuni Uppalavaṇṇā knows me, sad and disappointed, disappeared right there. All right, so we can close our eyes and contemplate for a couple of seconds. We can gently open our eyes again. What a beautiful sutta, as with all of them, of the Bhikkhuni Samyutta, and with all of them of the Samyutta Nikaya, and with all of them of the Pali Canon. We always like to start sutta study like this, it seems, here at Empty Cloud. Very enthusiastic. So as with all the other suttas that we've seen in the Bhikkhuni Samyutta, the sort of starting point is the same, except that in this particular sutta, there's a little bit of a slight different change, where instead of going to the blind man's grove, Venerable Uppalavaṇṇā goes at the foot of a sal tree in full flower. It might be at the blind man's grove, or maybe not. It's not specified. So it's worth mentioning who Venerable Uppalavaṇṇā is for those who are not familiar with her. She is one of the foremost disciples of the Buddha, we actually chant her name every morning here at Empty Cloud, together with the name of the other 12 bhikkhunis that are reputed to be the foremost disciples in certain disciplines by the Buddha. And Bhikkhuni Uppalavaṇṇā in particular is the foremost disciple of the Buddha in the psychic powers. And usually we can say the male counterpart is Mahamoggallana in the bhikkhu part. And together with Ayya Soma, they're kind of like the bhikkhuni equivalent of the bhikkhus of Sariputta, of Venerable Sariputta and Mahamoggallana. So it's kind of interesting to have a little bit of context on who Venerable Uppalavaṇṇā is. And also, actually, worth noting what her name means, which is the color of the blue lotus, apparently, as she was said to have a blue-black complexion. The commentaries have a lot of amusing stories on the Venerable Uppalavaṇṇā. I read a few of them, and they slightly all change and shift, but with this particular trait, they seem to all be in agreement that she had this particular blue-black complexion that apparently was a vow that she had made in past lives. So in this particular sutta, we see how, as she is dwelling in meditation, just with what happened in the other suttas with the other venerables, the other enlightened bhikkhunis, Māra comes and tries to get her out of meditation, tries to get her out of her practice. Then we see how he approaches her by, first of all, highlighting the fact that she's all alone there meditating under the tree. And then goes on into making a nice observation of her outer appearance. So going with, there is none whose beauty rivals yours, foolish girl. Aren't you afraid of rogues? So there's both the mentioning her outer appearance that is quite beautiful, apparently. And also at the same time, how that creates the grounds, according to Māra, for fear of assault, fundamentally. And it's quite interesting because we've seen how Māra in other suttas has gone, first to Vijaya, to trying to seduce her, as we've seen. Once again, making comments on her outer appearance, of how beautiful she is, and apparently Māra manifested as a pretty good-looking man as well, and was kind of like, well, of course, that's what we're here to do. I'm good-looking, you're good-looking. Clearly, we have better things to do than meditation. And then harassing Venerable Kisa Gotami. We've seen, I think, the last actually sutta study that we've seen, which similarly then, because she was alone in the woods, I was alluding to the fact that she was clearly in the search for men, because what else would a woman do by herself in the woods except for looking for for a man? So it's interesting how, we're seeing this, the parallel of harassment by Māra, the parallel with the bhikkhunis that we see throughout the suttas with the bhikkhus, or in particular actually with the Buddha. So how we see with the Buddha, for example, how Māra uses his daughters to tempt him and lure him. And and in this particular situation, instead, Māra actually impersonates all those actually stereotypical, I would say, roles that men can have with women throughout apparently the past 2,500 years. So whether it's catcalling or whether it's trying to seduce or harassing or making kind of insinuations, there is still a sort of trying to distract the practitioner from their spiritual practice, whether they're male or female. But in this particular sutta, we see how Māra actually brings one of the biggest fears that usually a woman could have, which is the fear of rape. So it's also worth mentioning that actually some of the commentaries actually speak about Venerable Uppalavaṇṇā being raped. But this actually happened not right after, but after she was already an enlightened being. And the commentaries describe how after the rape was consumed, the rapist actually was embedded in a fire vortex and killed instantly. And due to the basically instant awful karma of assaulting an enlightened being. But in this particular setup, we see that that Māra is just insinuating that fear and is kind of creating the conditions for that thought, for that preoccupation to happen in the mind of Venerable Uppalavaṇṇā. And, if you're a woman, this is definitely something that I think since we're born, pretty much, our mother or other women that surround us kind of teach us to be alert, to be aware of. So we become very street smart in terms of understanding our surroundings and being very careful of where we are and where it's safe or where it's not safe. And of course, being alone in the woods can create a lot of sort of conditions for feeling a little bit unsettled. But Venerable Uppalavaṇṇā, contrarily to myself, is an enlightened being. So as soon as sort of these ideas are presented, she understands straight away that this is the doing of Māra. This is Māra trying to distract her from her spiritual practice. And so she addresses him straight away without any hesitation and is pretty bold in how she addresses him. So she says, though 100,000 rogues just like you, I like very much, just like you, not some, arbitrary rogues, but just like Māra is manifesting. So it can be 1, 10, 100, 1,000, it doesn't matter. Just like you, they can come here. I stir not a hair. I feel no terror. She's like, talk to my hand. Talk to the hand. And she's like, even if I'm alone here in Māra, I don't fear you. And, as we mentioned, of course, being alone can create the conditions for fear to arise because we are more subject to vulnerability. But actually, when I was reading this for the first time, what really came to mind were also all the stories of the Thai forest masters, for example. And actually also within the Pali Canon of the Buddha. So it's not terribly different. You can, if you substitute rogues here, it's not with wild animals, for example. It's not terribly different when reading the biography of Ajahn Chah, of how, or all other Thai masters of when they're in the middle of the night, in their tent or whatever, and they start, or in their kuti, and they start hearing wild, horrible, loud noises outside and fearing for their lives and just being shattered by fear. And then, and terror. And kind of then finding inside of them the resources to overcome this state. So it's not terribly different. We're basically still talking about animals. Some are human animals, some are like wild animals, not human. But fundamentally, the attack, the sort of the aggression, the fear for this is very much similar. And it's interesting to see also how the Buddha talks about throughout the suttas how to deal with this fear and how to overcome it. Actually, in the Samyutta Nikaya, I was overjoyed when I was reading it to see multiple times the Buddha encouraging actually the recollection of the triple gem. So recollecting Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha as a skillful means to overcome fear, which, if you have a scientific materialist sort of mind state like mine, would not be exactly the first thing that would come in mind when having to tackle something like terror or fear, or say if someone is about to attack you physically. Interesting, right? And I was like, oh, would that be my first thought, to recollect the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha? Well, apparently it should be, as that would create the conditions for fear, for Māra not being capable of entering the mind, and then for fear not being capable of finding any hold within the mind. And then, of course, the Buddha encourages us to practice mindfulness and self-restraint through body, speech, and mind. So in that way, we create the conditions, by cultivating mindfulness and samadhi, we create the conditions for equanimity to arise in the mind. Bhante Sudazo a few weeks ago was sharing the literal definition of equanimity, the literal meaning of equanimity, which is looking closely, seeing closely. And it was actually such a powerful translation, I have to say. It was very useful for my mind to understand what we're actually really talking about with equanimity, in terms of what is the effect, the immediate effect in the mind. And when we reflect on how we go about the world and how we see things, the further they are from us, the more confused we are about them, the more there might be the chance that we might confuse them for something else. But the closer they are, the more evident they are. And then there's no ground for confusion. There's no, there's not a problem anymore. We actually see right through it. And hence, if we actually see what is in front of us, which we see in this case, Venerable Uppalavaṇṇā having developed perfect equanimity, so having developed the ability of seeing closely, she immediately sees Māra. She immediately sees those conditions that are creating fear to arise in the mind. Hence, just in that way, it ceases to be a problem. Or actually, it doesn't become a problem to begin with, rather than ceasing to be a problem. And other ways through which the Buddha talks about my understanding, in which he suggests to overcome fear, is, of course, to purify the body, to purify our actions through body, speech, and mind. And so, once again, applying right effort in order to create no conditions for restlessness, for regret, for remorse, for obstacles to arise. No conditions for aversion to arise. That is another sort of other way of looking at fear. So being averse to one particular thing, which is no different than craving for something not to happen. And as fear is a form of suffering, then of course the cause has to be desire. It's the second noble truth. And aversion is, once again, a form of desire. And then we go to this interesting verse afterwards where it says, I can make myself disappear. I can enter inside your belly. I can stand between your eyebrows, yet you won't catch a glimpse of me. I was like, oh, that's really, what a weird verse. Why does Venerable Uppalavaṇṇā want to go inside Māra's belly? And actually, it's interesting because in the Agamas, actually, this verse is attributed to Māra instead of Venerable Uppalavaṇṇā. So I did a little bit of research actually a few days ago on this in particular, and there seems to be a consensus among scholars that kind of fell through the cracks in the Pali Canon, but that this verse is definitely Māra trying to basically was intact in the Agamas. And the Agamas, for those who are not familiar, is the Chinese version of the Pali Canon, so in the Mahayana Canon. And fundamentally, these verses are what Māra is kind of trying to use in order to instill fear. Since the robes didn't work, he's like, well, I'm going to do a lot of like tricks with my superpowers and get inside your belly or between your eyebrows and do all weird, crazy things, which actually, very similar to where I come from in Italy, when the devil starts possessing people and then the priest has to go and do some bunch of exorcisms. So this is what sounded to me like that Māra becomes a sort of devil and gets inside the stomach or in the ear and gets you all deranged. So I agree. Well, not that I agree with the scholars, but I support the scholars since they've clearly done. They seem to know what they're talking about. I rely on the scholars, and so we see how then Venerable Uppalavaṇṇā replies, "I'm the master of my mind. The bases of power are well developed. I'm freed from all bondage, therefore I don't fear you, friend." And so this makes very much sense for it to be, the previous verse being the words of Māra, and then the latter verses, the verses of Uppalavaṇṇā as a response. Because once Māra tries to threaten her with superpowers, she's even more cool. She's like, oh, you can do whatever you want, but there is nothing. There is no grounds really for you to scare me, because actually I have mastered all the superpowers that need to be developed, both the mundane and the transcendental. So both the sort of quote unquote normal and the super normal. Mundane and super mundane. So she's not only someone who is extremely developed as a practitioner, as a meditation practitioner, but she's fully enlightened. So she has removed all the taints. So she has removed all greed, hatred, and delusion from the mind. which is what she mentions here, but by making the statement, I'm free from all bondage. And I'm the master of my mind. So when one has mastery over the mind, there is no room for Māra to enter, no room for fear then, therefore, to enter the mind. No room, no space, no conditions for anything unwholesome to appear. And so what is translated here as the basis of power, it's the Dipadas. So I checked the Pali just to make sure. Thanks to Sutta Central, that makes life very easy. Thank you, Bhante Sujata, for all the volunteers and other venerables. It's a public service announcement on suttacentral.net. Just with a click, you can check the Pali and then get back to the English, and you can find both Venerable Bhikkhubodi's translation and also Venerable Sujata's translation, so you can have a bit of a flavor of all the different verses. But yeah, so anyway, the Itipadas are fundamentally the basis for spiritual powers that create the conditions in order to practice Iddhi, which is, my understanding, is the super normal powers. And it's worth noting, actually, that in the commentaries, it said that Venerable Uppalavaṇṇā had attained enlightenment by contemplating the fire kasina, and then after her enlightenment, she had already developed, obviously, in order to attain enlightenment, the basis for spiritual powers. But then after her enlightenment, she mastered all the supernormal powers, which is why then the recollects her as the foremost disciple in that particular area. But it's important to mention how the basis for spiritual power are the conditions necessary in order to perform, quote unquote, both the kind of sort of more supernormal, the more miraculous kind of effects of powers, but also, most importantly, when it comes to Buddhist practice, which is what we're interested in, is the removal of all the defilements. And it's also worth highlighting how these superpowers, they're not miraculous in the way that we think of. At least from where I come from in my country, there's miracles happening everywhere. In actually, almost every church has some sort of trippy miracle happening from the relics of the particular saint that is celebrated in the town. And then there's different Mother Marys, where different, all sorts of interesting, miraculous things happening everywhere. But this is not exactly what we're talking about here in Buddhism, because they are not just random things that happen, but rather they're simply the direct consequence of practicing samadhi. So one does not need to be a Buddhist practitioner in order to develop psychic powers. One can just develop concentration, one-pointedness of mind, and then this will kind of come as a direct consequence. Now, what is unique to Buddhist practice is, once again, the basis of powers used as a means to an end to remove greed, hatred, and delusion. And of course, Bhante Sujata can explain a little bit further about that. And if you have more questions, and you can ask him on Monk Chat on Friday. would say that also worth mentioning that the Buddha is known throughout the suttas. We tend to think sometimes that it's such a rational path, and that the Buddha's are the Buddha's instructions are all like very not terribly different than Freud and Jung, but actually there's lots of mentions of crazy things happening in the Pali Canon. And when you get into Tibetan Buddhism, actually they often have developed a lot of, like, the monastics are quite open about that and showcase a lot of these interesting features. In the Theravada tradition, the monks are a little bit more conservative about showcasing all of this. And that's also because the Buddha recommended not to. So it's not that he was opposed to spiritual powers per se, but rather he was opposed to using them as a means to impress the lay people and extort favors, extort material goods, extort requisites in that way. So we see how Venerable Uppalavaṇṇā is a fully developed practitioner of all these types of superpowers, and hence there is no room for Māra to exist, really. And Māra, being somewhat intelligent, understands the Bhikkhuni Uppalavaṇṇā knows me. There is no room for me to do anything better. Go and disappear. So that's what he does, while also being sad and disappointed because he clearly is not enlightened. All right, so we've come to the end of this sutta. And if you have any questions or comments, you're welcome to put them in the live chat, and I'll try my best.
Thank you, Ayya Soma. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And welcome to some more friends joining in. Robin, Giovanna, John T. Inscrutable, Melody, and Elaine. And John says, so happy to have caught this live. It sounds like not much has changed in 2,500 years. Evil has flattery or fear to turn us aside from the path. We ought to know better by now. And Melody also says hello from Singapore, and Elaine saying hi as well.
Hey. Yeah, it's remarkable how the Dhamma is timeless. And so it provides the antidote that is timeless, but it also describes the states of our minds and what we're encountering that is no different from the circumstances of people 2,500 years in ancient India, 2,500 years ago. And I suspect also eons ago. And I suspect also without discoverable beginning ago. So fundamentally, we're all dealing with the same issues: greed, hatred, and delusion. And that's, somewhat depressing. But the great thing is that we're also dealing with the same solutions. So we have the same solutions available. And that's the great news, that there is actually a way out of suffering. There was a friend the other day that shared how she has belief tattooed. And the meaning was believe that an end of suffering is possible. What a beautiful thing. Yeah, made me very happy, actually. I tattooed it in my mind. It's, that's what the Buddha has given us as a gift.
We have a question from Facebook. So Lochana asks, did the Bhikkhuni Sangha first start in Gautama Buddha's time, or did it exist in the other 28 Buddha's time as well?
My understanding is that it existed without discoverable beginning. So that whenever a Buddha comes to this world, they, in whichever form the Buddha comes to this world, they share the teachings with the fourfold Sangha, or the sixfold Sangha, actually, as we should really say. Fully ordained men, fully ordained women, laymen, lay women, and hopefully fully ordained trans people, non-binary people, and trans and non-binary lay people.
There's no more questions on YouTube. So
Great.
might be an early morning. So thanks everyone for joining us. You can come back at 7:30 p.m. tonight for some meditation as well as a Dharma talk. And again, Thursday and Friday as we continue our YouTube live streams. So we can end with 3 sadhus.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
And enjoy the rest of your day.